All right, and welcome to the language dive. So, the chunk we are going to be looking at, or the sentence, is because water is not evenly distributed across the globe, nearly 1/5 of the world's population does not have access to enough water. So, first of all, we're going to take a look at the chunk nearly 1/5 of the world's population. Who is this sentence about? And how do you know? Think about that a second. Okay, this sentence is about 1/5 of the people in the world. The apostrophe S makes worlds a possessive noun. So we know that it is about the population of the world. 1/5. That is telling us how many. So knowing what we know about fractions, think about what 1/5 means. So the whole would be 5/5, 5 out of 5. So if you think about the world's population, every single person in the world, and you divide them into 5 groups, one of those groups would be 1/5 of the world population. Does that make sense? All right, so moving on to the next chunk. Does not have access to enough water. What does this chunk tell us about 1/5 of the world's population? Yes, it is telling us that they can only get some of the water they need. I have underlined the verb have. Our goal today was to look at the function of verbs. Have is the verb in this chunk. So, have is describing an action or a state of being. So when you go back to your worksheet and it has where you list verbs, have would be one of those verbs that you could list. Okay, so let's start at the first chunk, because water. Can you figure out why Rochelle Strauss, the author, uses the word because? So because signals that what comes next is the cause of or the reason why so many people do not have enough water. Because is a conjunction. So what is this chunk about? Correct. This chunk is about water. That would be the noun, that would be the subject. Now let's take a look at the chunk is not evenly distributed across the globe. What does this chunk tell us about water? So it tells us the amount of water is not the same in different places of the earth. Where is this talking about? Yes, across the globe, which would be the same as around the world or all of the world. A globe represents the earth or our world. So it is saying across, around, all of our world. I have underlined is not right here and distributed. I have underlined these because this pair is pairs the function of this verb. So is both of these describe an action or a state of being. Is not distributed would be a past participle, a negative present passive. Does that make sense? So is not distributed. So distributed would be the verb. It is the state of being or an action. Is not is telling us that that is a negative. It's a present negative. So the water is not is not evenly distributed. We're not saying that the water is distributed, we're saying it is not. So that would be a negative. All right, so think about other verbs that we could use to talk about with something being distributed or not being distributed around the room, maybe that you're in now. And think about how the verbs differ slightly in meaning. So distributed, we've talked about with like division. So what another verb could be divided, because water is not evenly divided across the globe. Now that might change our meaning a little bit. The verb changed to divided, but it means a similar, it has a slightly different meaning, but it has a similar meaning. Think about others. Maybe placed, maybe is positioned, or maybe is organized. Now let's think about this word evenly, okay? Why do you think Strauss wrote this word, evenly? Okay, so yeah, we'll talk about this more next lesson, but evenly we're looking at kind of like division, okay? That it doesn't mean that everybody doesn't get some or all the places of the world doesn't get water. It just may not be evenly. Some may get more than others. So if we look at our note catcher for our language dive, which is in our worksheet for this lesson's slides, it has blank noun is/is not or are/are not blank, which would be a past participle. And then to end the sentence, it says around the classroom. So as an example, I'm going to use, thinking about our classroom back at school, desks as my noun. Desks is positioned? No, that doesn't seem to make sense. Desks are positioned around the classroom. So positioned would be my past participle. Okay, so it's the verb. The ed suffix tells us it happened in the past. So desks are positioned around the room. I could also use an example sentence of iPads are not positioned around the room because we don't have iPads back at school. Okay, so think about a sentence using a noun. The noun I used was desks or iPads. The noun in this sentence was water. So think about another noun you could use. Then think about our grammar on whether it is or is not or are not. Okay? The not would signify negative, meaning it isn't, or the absence of. So when I say iPads are not positioned, I'm saying there aren't iPads. There are no iPads. There is an absence of iPads around our classroom. Okay? So you have to decide if it's a negative or a positive, and if is or are makes more sense in your grammar. Okay? Then you're going to think of a past participle. So we already used examples like distributed, divided, positioned, placed, organized. To know it's a past participle, the suffix is going to be ed. So make sure your verb has a suffix with ed. Now to end that would be around the classroom. Make sure your sentence makes sense. Okay? So go ahead and write that sentence in your language dive note catcher. The next part of that is you're going to take a look at this entire sentence. Because water is not evenly distributed across the globe, nearly 1/5 of the world's population does not have access to enough water. You're going to think about whether or not you can say this sentence in your own words. For instance, it could be something like, many people don't have enough water because there isn't an equal amount of it around the world. That would be saying the same thing. Now, I can also put the sentence in a different order. For instance, I could start with my last two chunks and put them at the beginning. Nearly 1/5 of the world's population does not have access to enough water, comma, because water is not evenly distributed across the globe. So I hope this helps you to complete your language dive note catcher.